Hello, so this video is going to cover the paramilitaries, the re-emergence of the paramilitaries and the increasing involvement of the British Army in the Northern Ireland Troubles. So we're going to start looking at the IRA reactions to 1969. So as you may know, the IRA were really castigated for their involvement, or lack of it, around about the burning, the Belfast burnings, Bombay Street, things like that. It appeared as if they weren't on the streets at all. So it really caught the IRA off guard. They had publicly failed to protect their communities, and embarrassingly, the British Army had been the ones who had come in and rescued Catholic nationalist communities from loyalist mobs. So this is very embarrassing, especially for nationalist communities. The British Army was welcomed into these communities. They were given tea and sandwiches. They were clapped into nationalist areas, and the nationalists really preferred to, at that stage, to deal with them rather than what they'd been used to, which is the unionist dominated RUC or the B specials. Why was the IRA then not prepared for 1969? Well, it was involved in a border campaign way back in the 1950s. This is low scale, wasn't very well supported whatsoever, and it fizzled into really nothing, and they really had an order to dump arms, to actually try to hide arms and stop fighting. In 1962, it actually became more and more involved in Marxist politics, and this Marxist thinking really did turn them away from the idea of their, the use of violence to achieve their means. This caused a deep split in the organisation whenever it got to 1969, especially with the influx of younger members into the IRA. They were much more driven to fight, much more radical, much more nationalist, and not influenced by this Marxist thinking as much as the older generation. So what happened then? Well, in late 1969, the IRA was going to split into two organisations, which was going to completely transform the Troubles as people knew it. Okay, so what you have then is the official IRA. Okay, the official IRA, that's the older one that everybody kind of knows. This again is formed based around the ideas of Marxism. It wants to create an all Ireland, United Ireland, but it wants to create like a kind of a Marxist state in Ireland. It uses violence, and until that happens until May 1972, when it actually declares a ceasefire. 1972 is the bloodiest year of the Troubles. It split again in 1974 with the violent INLA, the Irish National Liberation Army, which had quite a bloody history to it as well. But what's really important here is this official IRA really does split, and the younger, more radical members of that there form into the very famous Provisional IRA, or PARA. Okay, and this group is made up of younger, more radical, more militant members, much more prepared to use violence, and they regard themselves as the protector of the nationalist community. Again, violence is a whole key part of its aim. It believes it's going to achieve United Ireland through force. Okay, so physical force. Aims then much more extreme, much more uncompromising, and aims to achieve United Ireland within a short term. What's its aims then? Well, it wants full civil rights for all. It wants to defend the nationalist population of Northern Ireland, the North of Ireland. It wants to completely destroy the Unionist Stormont government. It hates majority rule, hates Stormont as it is. It regards Northern Ireland as being a statelet and not a part of an all Ireland context the way that they believe it should be. And very important here, it wants to remove British imperialism. Okay, that word is very, very key here. Okay, remove British imperialism from Ireland. Now that could mean the British Army, but it also, to many Unionists, it actually means them, to Protestants in the north of Ireland. They believe that they are targeted as well too. So this is quite a catch-all word that has been very highly criticised. Very, very extreme, very uncompromising. It's a sign of how things were getting even more divisive, and it's now going to start to target the British Army. Okay, remove British imperialism. The British Army is now a target. This is going to really ramp up the Troubles as we know it. So what are the British Army's reactions to this? Well, The British Army really realised at the very start that if things were not sorted out politically, they'd be like stuck in the middle, and that's exactly what's going to happen. Okay, they know all about the Provisional IRA, and they know its aims, and they know that they're also going to be targets. So one method of trying to get things sorted is to be proactive, to actually go in and try to find the key elements here, to maybe try to find weapons, try to take out the people who are in that group. Okay, so at the very start they had this honeymoon period. They're welcomed by the nationalist community. However, as British generals had predicted, their welcome was limited by time and the need for a political solution. In the absence of any agreement, the British Army increasingly found itself under pressure, and it found itself targeted. Violence was increasing daily, and the army was just simply getting stuck in the middle between Unionists and Nationalists. Provisional IRA declared an aim of removing British imperialism, which meant the British Army was now a target, and they were having to guard against attacks by being proactive. This involved the prospect of raiding nationalist areas for weapons. Well, where are you going to try to find weapons and guns and potentially bombs? You're going to go into real Republican areas, and that's going to be a major step, a major escalation in the campaign. So what happened was this: they actually targeted, as you might expect, they targeted the Falls Road, a real key Republican area of Belfast. So they went in looking for arms, looking for members of the Provisional IRA, and this was in July 1970. They completely had to close down this area. People were held under a curfew. They weren't allowed out. A lot of the homes were destroyed, looking for weapons, looking for ammunition. CS gas was used, and people were actually there were people killed in this operation as well too. Okay, so nationalists were put on lockdown. The results of this, though, they did find guns. They found about over 100 guns, but the results of this were horrific in terms of its long-term process, because the army's previously good relations with the nationalist community were transformed to one of absolute hatred, especially in this Republican area of Belfast. The home searching, the British Army on the streets, really transformed what people thought of them, and they really did become targets. And what you might expect is that the IRA membership of the Provisional IRA went up, okay, and hatred between these two groups was going to become more and more intense. So the IRA membership raised from 100 before this action to 800 afterwards. That's a huge increase in numbers, all because of this Falls Road curfew. So some of these actions taken had highly negative effects. So what was the Loyalist reaction to this? Well, Loyalists felt further threatened. They could see the growth of the Provisional IRA, and they also felt that the Unionist Loyalist community has been targeted. And Protestant paramilitaries like the UVF started to grow in numbers as well too, especially since Night Group began its civil rights campaign. What was their aims? Well, they opposed nationalism, and they opposed O'Neill's what they regarded as appeasement of Catholics. Okay, it means that they felt that O'Neill was giving in too many things to the Catholic community. They also wanted an end to Stormont, but they wanted to return to complete Unionist dominance in Northern Ireland as well. Okay, so what was set up in around about 1970 was the UDA. This is the Ulster Defence Association, and it's set up to counter the growth in the nationalist Republican side. This was set up in 1971, a new loyalist organisation, and it was set up to defend against Republican violence and protect loyalist communities as well too. What's really significant is how many members it had. By 1972 it has over 30,000 members. This is actually a number that's so big that the government cannot act against it. They cannot ban it because it's too big to ban. They would have, the jails would be simply overcrowded with members of this organisation. So it was left unbanned throughout the Troubles up until much later on. So a really big number to deal with that. Okay, alright, so James Chichester Clark really did find himself completely out of his depth, as many people suspected he would after O'Neill, and eventually he was pushed out. He resigned as Prime Minister Who's he replaced by? Well, he's replaced by the person everybody expected, way back. So that is by Brian Faulkner. He has got his chance now to make his mark, and he wants to try to make an end to the Troubles. And people do think he's the right man for the job. So why did Chichester Clark resign? Well, he just couldn't handle the increasing violence at the time. He was really angry with the British government. He wanted stronger measures to deal with the violence. The British were eager not to do this because they knew it would further antagonise nationalists. Brian Faulkner became Prime Minister and had his chance to lead the official Unionist Party. Many Unionists welcomed this. They felt he was the man with solutions. They felt he understood the situation better than Clark. He was popular in his party, as we've realised before, and he promises solutions. He promises, look, you know what, we can get through this here, we can get through the violence, we can get through the turmoil, and he promises one thing: internment, that is imprisonment of suspects without trial. This had worked way back in the 1950s, and his idea was to use this now to try to get the same effect. Right, so what was the reaction of the political parties to the Troubles? Well, the impact of the violence had a massive impact on these different parties. Previously, there had only been really two major parties. That was the official Unionist Party, the Unionists, and you had the Nationalists. It was led by Eddie McAteer, much smaller, very little influence, little Catholic support, and Catholics, remember, they disliked the fact that it was solely concerned about United Ireland, not about civil rights. Troubles impacted by creating three new political parties as they tore themselves apart over what was happening on the streets. So you've got this new one that everybody knows now, the Democratic Unionist Party. So the DUP, the Troubles split the OUP completely down the middle. In March 1970, several of their MPs were expelled from the party for opposing how it dealt with security in Northern Ireland, and many in the public were also angry at their handling of the situation, and some demanded a real hard line action against nationalists and Republicans, and this is led by Ian Paisley, who actually did manage to win O'Neill's old Bandside parliamentary seat. Paisley led the Protestant Unionist Party, but later changed this here to what's called the Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP. What was its aims? Well, its aims were to strongly oppose any Republican terrorism, to defend the Constitution of Northern Ireland, to reform the economy and society of Northern Ireland, and then you have the Alliance Party, obviously the party right in the middle. This was the Third Way Party. It started by Oliver Napier, and it argued that there could be ways to integrate nationalism and unionism by finding agreed ways forward. Mildly Unionists agreed with consent about Northern Ireland not changing unless the people wished it to, but it was open to all based on their every background and creed, and it hoped to achieve O'Neill's promised civil rights reforms. Mostly middle class with limited broad support. Whenever tensions happen, it tends to force people to the extremes, and that's what happened here. And then you've got the SDLP, a very famous political party. So the Troubles has split nationalism just as deeply. Eddie McAteer's Nationalist Party struggled to deal with the civil rights, as you know, and they began to fade away, and they were replaced by this SDLP, Social Democratic and Labour Party. It's led by West Belfast MP Jerry Fitt, started in 1970. John Hume's in that as well too, and it has broadly nationalist ideas, but based on non-violence. So it's moderately left-wing. It's linked up with the British Labour Party, for example. It wants civil rights, fairness, and equality. It aspires to United Ireland, but only through peaceful means. It became the main opposition party in Stormont, and it withdrew in 1971 because of the government's lack of response to the shooting of 2 Catholics in Derry by the British Army. Alright, so hopefully this explains this section here. This takes us right up to your key points just before 1972, so internment and Bloody Sunday and direct rule. Okay, take care.